Hey, if you're new to my channel, then consider liking and subscribing. It would really mean a lot to me, and honestly, it'd make my day. If you already did, thank you so much. Oh, and by the way, if you like listening to fan fiction, check out my other channel. The link's in the description.
One Piece Legends by xAlreadyOverx. Luffy dreams of becoming the queen of the pirates, not just to find the One Piece, but to prove Shanks wrong after he told her she could never be king. Armed with the powers of the gum-gum fruit and a fierce determination, she set sail despite her inability to swim, relying on her loyal crew and trusted first mate to survive the dangers of the Grand Line. But as the journey unfolds, Luffy begins to experience strange, unfamiliar feelings, especially whenever her stoic swordsman is near. Could it be more than just friendship? Or is this just one more mystery waiting to be unraveled on the high seas? And before we start, a massive shout out to the warlords of this channel: Case Clark, Leaf5_SCXR, Tristan Ward. You three are the backbone of this community. Your support means the world. Seriously, thank you for standing with me. If you want to join the ranks of these legends, hit that join button and become a channel member today. Let's grow this thing together. Much love, and as always, adios.
Luffy shifted on Zoro's shoulder, resting her chin against her open hand, her elbow digging into the swordsman's back and providing her with a perch. She tuned out the conversation between Zoro and Sanji, not all that interested in them when something interesting seemed to be happening at the entrance. "This restaurant sure is lively," she giggled, watching as a marine stumbled into the restaurant, blood dripping down his face from under his hat. "Lieutenant Full Body," he yelled, catching the attention of the injured marine lieutenant who had been watching the various confrontations going on in the restaurant. "He's escaped. The pirate Kriegsman has escaped." "What?" Full Body yelled, pushing himself to his feet and storming up to the injured marine. "That's ridiculous. We've already lost 7 men, impossible. When we picked him up 3 days ago, he was about to starve to death. We haven't fed him anything since then, have we?" Full Body glared at his subordinate, as if doubting that his orders had been followed to the letter. Around him, the various customers of the Bharati began to whisper amongst themselves, their eyes wide with panic. "The dreaded Don Krieg pirates," one woman whispered, covering her mouth in horror. "Isn't he supposedly the most powerful pirate of the East Blue?" another muttered. Luffy's eyes darted around the restaurant, silently listening to the various conversations being held as people digested the marine's words. She was slightly confused. The raven-haired girl had never heard of this Don Krieg guy, but it seemed like he was kind of a big deal out here. "I'm really sorry, sir. A gunshot rang out through the restaurant, causing many people to jump in surprise as the injured marine pitched forward, revealing a shadowed figure standing behind him. The newcomer held a smoking gun in one hand and was staring down at the marine he had shot with an unimpressed expression on his face. "Zoro," Luffy muttered quietly, her eyes focused on the newcomer. "Sure, Lou." Zoro gave Luffy a small pat on her back before allowing the raven-haired girl to slide off of his shoulder and back onto her feet, his own gaze moving to the shadowed figure with the gun. The customers near the door began to back away, scared of the man that was supposedly one of the dreaded Don Krieg pirates. Chef Zeph, Sanji, and the other cooks didn't appear to be frightened of the man at their door. In fact, most of them looked as if they were merely curious as to what would happen next. "Another customer has arrived," Patty muttered, his tone unimpressed. Zeph just scoffed. "He'd better not cause any more trouble in my restaurant." "So he's a pirate, huh?" Luffy giggled softly, her eyes wide with curiosity. Full Body began to shake, eyes wide as he stared at the pirate that was mere feet in front of him. He took a few steps back as the man began to walk towards him, but the pirate just passed him, not even giving the marine lieutenant a second glance. Now that he was completely in the restaurant, Sanji was able to get a good look at the man. Even though his clothes were clean, the man looked no better than a walking corpse. His face was sunken and pale with dark circles under both eyes. He didn't appear to have bathed in days, and there was blood caked on the side of his face. The newcomer made his way slowly towards an empty table before dropping heavily into one of the chairs and resting his feet on the tabletop. "I don't care what it is," he muttered quietly, appearing as if he was seconds away from unconsciousness. "Just bring me some food. This is a restaurant, isn't it?" Immediately, Patty was at the man's side, prepared to take his order. "Welcome, you damn bastard." Most of the customers flinched back at Patty's insulting words, worried that the Krieg pirate would be offended and lash out at them. The man just scoffed, appearing unfazed by the odd treatment. "I'll only say it once more, so listen up. Bring me some food." Full Body frowned, watching the two interact with a tense expression on his face. "He's gonna kill that cook," he muttered, slightly annoyed. "Of course, right away," Patty said, rubbing his shaved head as he grinned down at the pirate. "But if I may be so bold to inquire, how do you intend to pay for your meal?" As soon as the words left Patty's mouth, the man had his gun out again and was pointing it at Patty's forehead. "Will a bullet be enough?" he said, his tone dark. "So I take it that you don't have any money then?" Patty's smile instantly disappeared and he glared at the man, not even seeming to notice the gun pressing into his forehead. Before anyone could blink, the cook lifted his arms up and slammed his fisted hands down onto the man's back. The force of his attack was so strong that it even broke the chair that the pirate was sitting on. "What?" Full Body's eyes widened in shock, having not expected the cook to fight back. Even though that blonde waiter had attacked him, the Marine had mistakenly thought that the other employees were more civilized. "Why that damn Patty?" Zeph growled, crossing his arms over his chest and glaring at the cook, irritated. "He broke another one of my chairs." Luffy whistled as she pushed up the brim of her hat, an impressed expression on her face. "Whoa, what power!" Near her, Sanji silently took another drag of his cigarette, blowing the smoke out with a sigh as he watched Patty continue to talk. "Sorry pirate, but our policy is to only serve paying customers," Patty hissed, sliding a hand up his arm as if he was pushing up invisible sleeves. "If you can't pay up, you can't eat." All around the restaurant people began to cheer the chef on, encouraging him. The only ones who remained silent were the members of the Straw Hats, Chef Zeph, and Sanji. Luffy's expression was unreadable, but her eyes said that she was disappointed in the way that everyone was acting. The man was just hungry and they were cheering on a man who wanted to starve him. From his spot on the ground, the man's stomach let out a loud growl. His face contorted in pain and he clutched at it with one shaky hand. "Oh, I can hear your stomach is grumbling from here, you filthy pirate," Patty stated, his tone taunting. "That was a fart, you jackass, just bring me something to eat, now." The man continued to shake, looking weaker than when he had first stumbled through the door. "You're no customer, we're not giving you anything, so beat it." Sanji turned away from the scene in front of him and silently made his way to the kitchen. His departure was only noticed by Zeph and Luffy, who tilted her head in a curious manner. "What is he doing?" she wondered, taking a step towards the kitchen. Zeph just smirked as he watched Sanji pull out a knife and start to work. His child would never change. Luffy's gaze was drawn away from Sanji's work to where Patty had started kicking the downed pirate. The worn-out man was too weak to do anything other than lie there and do his best to curl into a smaller target. Full Body had had enough. "I can't take it anymore," he muttered, taking slow steps backwards and praying that no one would notice him as he made his way towards the main door. "I don't want anything to do with this kind of restaurant." Full Body grasped the handle of the door and took one last look around the restaurant floor. "I'll never come here again." Once Patty was finally satisfied and certain that the pirate would give him no more trouble, he turned back to the other customers of the restaurant and smiled. "All right, everybody," he called, grabbing the edges of his apron and doing a small curtsy. "Please, continue with your meal." As people began to return to what they had been doing before the noisy interruption, Patty grabbed the collar of the pirate's jacket and threw him over his shoulder as if he was a sack of potatoes. He carried him through the back rooms and past the kitchen before stepping outside onto the back porch and tossing the unconscious man onto the wooden floor. "Please get lost." His words were polite and he dusted eyes re-entering the restaurant, leaving the injured man sprawled on the ship's lower deck. "Damn him. How dare he?" The man weakly forced himself to curl onto his side before flipping onto his stomach and struggling to push himself up onto his hands and knees. "I wouldn't normally let anyone get away with that crap." From the second level of the restaurant, Luffy watched as the man tried and failed to force himself to his knees, her head pillowed and the arms resting against the railing. After another minute of watching the guy mutter to himself and struggle to stand up, Luffy finally spoke up. "Hey, you're starving, aren't you?" The man froze, shocked at the sound of the raven-haired girl's voice before he turned his head slightly and glared up at her. "Shut up," he muttered quietly, the words shaky. I'm not the least bit hungry." Luffy tilted her head curiously, seemingly confused by the man's words, before her gaze was drawn to movement on the man's left. A small smile came to her face when she saw Sanji step out onto the deck, a large tray of food held in his hands. The she-pirate silently watched as the blonde chef set down the tray in front of the injured pirate, muffling a small giggle when she saw the man's head shoot up so he could stare at the food in shock. The food looked amazing: steamed rice mixed with shrimp, clam, and different kinds of fish. Steam floated from the plate and Luffy breathed in deeply, her mouth watering at the delicious smells coming from the food. "So yummy." The man's eyes slid to the side after a second of staring at the food and narrowed as he watched Sanji settle himself down onto the ground, the blonde man leaning back against the railing. The blonde chef ignored the glare sent his way and took a large drag of his cigarette, eyes focused on the blue sky above him. "Eat it," he finally said, still not looking at the injured pirate. The man sniffed at the food before grinding his teeth together and clenching his hands into fists. "Shut up, go away," he yelled, his body shaking as he forced himself to turn away from the food. "This is worse. I won't accept charity. Take it away." "Don't be so tough, just eat it already," Sanji sighed, dropping his gaze from the sky so he could stare at the pale teal walls of the restaurant. "I don't care what they say in there. To me, any hungry person's a customer." The man still refused to look at the food. I can't pay for it." Sanji sighed again, finally looking over at the injured man and then down to the plate of food. "The vast ocean can be very cruel," he began, his tone quiet, his eyes returning to the ocean. "It's awful to not have any food or water. It's almost a death sentence. It's so hard to survive." Sanji fell silent and took another drag of his cigarette, taking his time letting the smoke out again. "I understand starving people more than anyone," he finally said. His gaze was unfocused, as if he wasn't actually there but instead was reliving a memory from his past. The injured pirate wanted to ignore what the blonde chef was saying, but the heartfelt feeling behind Sanji's words caused him to shake. Finally, he turned his head to catch Sanji's gaze, the blonde man smiling slightly when he realized he had the other man's attention. "You can die for your pride if you want, but if you eat and survive, won't that give you the opportunity to fight for something truly worth having in the future?" The man gasped, his eyes widening as Sanji's words echoed through his head. His chest clenched tightly as he felt the immense weight lift from his body, understanding what the blonde chef was trying to tell him. He gulped loudly before forcing himself into a sitting position and grabbing the plate of food. He brought it close to his face with one hand and grabbed the spoon sticking out of the rice with the other before beginning to chow down. He shoveled bite after bite into his mouth, not even pausing to swallow and causing his cheeks to swell with food. Tears poured from his eyes as he ate, mixing with the food on the plate, and after a minute he stopped eating and pressed the heel of one hand against his eyes in an effort to stop crying. "This is delicious," he sniffled, still holding the plate of food close to his face. "I'm sorry. I thought I was going to die. Thank you. Thank you." He continued to mumble thanks to Sanji through his sniffling and crying, and the blonde chef grinned brightly as he watched the man return to the food. This food is delicious. I've never had such a good meal in my whole life." Sanji chuckled, his whole face lighting up at the compliment. "Damn straight it is," he exclaimed. From the second floor, Luffy watched the two men interact, a large smile on her own face. "Well now," she giggled. "I've just found a good cook for my ship." She leaned forward over the railing, kicking her feet out behind her in a childish manner as she called down to the injured pirate. "Hey, aren't you lucky? If he hadn't given you something to eat, it'd be all over for you by now." Leaning forward more, Luffy braced her whole weight on her hands and flipped up into a handstand before allowing herself to fall forward off the railing and onto the first floor, making sure to land on her feet. The pirate just watched her curiously, not sure who the raven-haired girl was, while Sanji tensed, his eyes becoming hearts. Not noticing Sanji's change, Luffy turned to him and put a hand on her hip before holding out the other one to the blonde chef. "Hey, Mr. Cook, care to join us? I'm gathering crewmates and you could be the chef on our pirate ship." Sanji quickly moved until he was kneeling in front of Luffy and took one of her hands between his. "Such an angel such as you wants a man such as me beside her? I will make you food filled with my love, oh angel." Luffy blinked a few times and tilted her head, confused by Sanji's outburst, before she finally giggled. "You're silly." Sanji swooned at Luffy's laugh, placing a delicate kiss on the back of the girl's hand. "My angel's laugh is so beautiful." "Hey girlie," the injured pirate finally said, dragging the raven-haired girl's attention away from the odd chef in front of her. "What you said? You're a pirate?" "Yup." Luffy pulled her hand out of Sanji's grasp and moved so she could sit on top of the railing near the other man. Sanji grumbled slightly before setting himself down on the ground between Luffy and the other pirate and looking up at the girl. "A pirate? Angel? Why did you attack the restaurant, dear one? You must have had a reason." "That was an accident," Luffy exclaimed, puffing her cheeks out and pouting. "That stupid marine guy attacked first. We were just defending ourselves." "Ah, my angel is so cute when she pouts," Sanji swooned, hearts returning to his eyes. After another few seconds of swooning, Sanji returned to normal and took a drag of his cigarette before looking back up at Luffy. "You should try not to damage this restaurant anymore though, Angel. The head chef here was once a chef on a notorious pirate ship. I would hate to see you get hurt." Luffy's eyes widened and a grin came to her face before she looked back at the door to the restaurant. "Hey, so that old man was a pirate?" She looked semi-impressed, her mind flashing back to her argument with the middle-aged chef. "Yeah, for that old fart, this restaurant is worth more than any treasure." Sanji's tone was soft, his gaze unfocused as he thought about his mentor. Not just him. All the cooks who work here were once fierce pirates as well. It's why a lot of pirates and criminals come to the restaurant. Luffy laughed, raising one hand to rest on the brim of her hat. "This place is lively. You probably never have a dull moment." Sanji began to swoon next to Luffy, hearts returning to his eyes. "Ah, is my Angel-chan worried about me? Don't you fret. I'm used to things here and I can handle anything if it's for you, Raven Goddess." Luffy made a face as she watched Sanji dance around her. "You're funny. Anyway, recently, most me to watch the cooks and pirates brawl. But thanks to that, it scares away all of the part-time waiters." Next to him, Luffy was balanced on the railing, clapping the soles of her feet together as she listened to Sanji talk. "Ah," she finally said. "That explains it. No wonder the old man wants me to work here for a whole year." "Ah, a year with my beautiful Angel-chan? This is a dream come true?" Sanji held his hands together and stared up at the she-pirate happily. "Oh, I never told you," Luffy exclaimed, slamming one fist into her open palm. "My name is Monkey D. Luffiko. So are you gonna join my pirate crew or what?" "How cruel," Sanji whined. "I would love to sail with you, Luffiko-chan, but alas I cannot. I have a duty to this restaurant that I cannot abandon." "No." Luffy leaned forward until she was staring at Sanji upside down, her face inches from the blonde chef and a frustrated look in her eyes. "I refuse." "Wah. About what?" Luffy flipped back up until she was once again sitting cross-legged on the railing, her hands on her hips. "I refuse your refusal. You're a good cook so you need to come with me and be a pirate." Sanji sighed, sweat dropping and flapping his hand in Luffy's direction. Luffiko-chan. I'm terribly sorry but I can't leave here. I have a very important reason." "So, what's this reason of yours?" Luffy crossed her arms over her chest and tilted her head, watching the blonde chef curiously. "Ah, Luffiko-chan." Sanji fidgeted slightly from his place on the ground as he struggled to come up with an answer. It's a personal reason." Luffy sighed and nodded slightly. "Well, I guess I can understand that. I won't push you," then she pouted slightly. "But you're gonna have to tell me eventually, you know." Sanji smiled softly, silently thanking Luffy for her understanding on the matter. "Sorry to interrupt, but... Oh, are you finished?" Luffy turned her head and stared down at the injured pirate, watching as he set the plate that had held the food and the silverware down at his side. The plate was completely clean, not a single crumb still remained, and the man wiped at his mouth with the back of his head as he nodded to answer Luffy's question. "Yeah, thank you again." He nodded his head respectfully to Sanji before looking back at Luffy. "I'm a member of the Krieg Pirates. The name's Jin. Luffiko, you're a pirate too. What's your goal?" Luffy's face lit up and she laughed. "I'm looking for the One Piece. After I get a cook, I'm headed for the Grand Line." Jin paled, his eyes widening in shock at the raven-haired girl's excited appearance. How could anyone be looking forward to going to the Grand Line, to the pirate's graveyard? And she was young too. Jin's gaze narrowed. You're still looking for a cook. Your crew must be quite small, he stated, watching the so-called she-pirate carefully. Yeah, we've got 5, counting him. Luffy replied, pointing one finger over at Sanji. Luffiko-chan, I thought we already discussed this. Sanji sighed, his words completely ignored as Jin continued to talk. Look, you seem like a good girl, if a bit naive, so let me give you a piece of advice. You'd better not go to the Grand Line. That is a place you want to avoid. Jin stressed his words, wanting to convey how awful the Grand Line was. You're still young. There's no need to rush. The Grand Line is only a small part of the world's vast oceans. If you really want to be a pirate, there are many less intimidating places. When he finished, he watched Luffy's face, hoping that he had convinced the raven-haired girl. Oh, I see. Luffy finally said, her smile still on her face. So Jin, do you know anything about the Grand Line? Have you been there? No, I don't know anything about it. Jin's words were quiet, barely audible, and he brought one shaking hand to cover his eyes as he began to tremble all over. I don't understand anything about it. Nothing at all. That's why it's so scary. After a few seconds of silence, Sanji snorted, taking another drag of his cigarette. Are you really one of the dreaded Krieg's men? I didn't think he'd hire such chickens. Krieg? Luffy asked, tilting her head. They were saying that name inside. Is he a pirate? Yeah, he's supposedly the greatest pirate in the whole East Blue, Sanji said, turning to face Luffy. He has a total of 50 pirate ships under his helm. They say he's a monster who has never been beaten. Inside the kitchens, the chefs were discussing the same thing. Carne, one of the top chefs behind Sanji and Patty, had been telling the others of how fierce some Don Krieg was said to be. So what if he's a monster? Patty snorted, pouring a few drops of cooking sherry into one of the frying pans as he listened to the other man talk. He's got more than 5,000 people under his command though, Carne continued talking, having finished chopping the large turnip in front of him. The man glanced down at the large knife in his hands worriedly. What if that guy tells Don Krieg what happened here earlier? It'd be like an elephant stepping on an ant. He'd blow this whole restaurant to smithereens. Patty stormed over to his fellow chef and glared down at the smaller brunette. So you mean, I should have let him eat for free, or some nonsense like that? How's that fair to the other guests? Carne turned to watch as Patty took a large swig of the sherry before jabbing a finger at his own chest. That's bring disgrace on the Bharati name, and it'd also bring shame to all us, warrior chefs. All the chefs around them began to listen in to the argument. They didn't completely stop their work but allowed themselves to watch the confrontation out of the corner of their eyes. How many pirates do you think we've beaten up, till now? Patty continued, almost shouting down at Carne. If you're so scared, then you're better off quitting. What did ye say? Carne snarled back. Your attitude's the reason why we lost all of our waiters, Patty. It's your fault we're so understaffed. Well, they were all cowards. We didn't need 'em anyway. By this point, the other chefs had completely given up on working and were instead all crowded around the two shouting men. Carne began to roll up his sleeves to the sounds of the other chefs cheering them on. Come on. Kick his ass. Fight, hey, you morons. Everyone froze at the sound of head chef Zeph's voice, turning to face the man with matching winces and shocked looks. Get back to work. Right away, owner, quicker than appeared possible. All of the chefs turned around and went back to their work. Even Patty and Carne stopped fighting at Zeph's command. Zeph just shook his head in disbelief. Geez. Loud morons. Jin stepped over the railing and onto the small rowboat that Sanji had given him before turning back to untie the rope that kept it tied to the Bharati. Well, later then, Jin said, grinning at both Sanji and Luffy. He opened his mouth to remind Luffy of his warning, but she just shook her head and giggled. I'm still going to the Grand Line. Yeah, do what you want. Jin sighed. We're strangers, so I've got no right to stop you. I just thought that I should warn you. Luffy just chuckled and Jin smiled back as well before turning his gaze to Sanji. Oh, and Sanji. Thank you very much. You saved my life. That fried rice of yours was delicious. The best cooking I've ever tasted. I hope I can come back and have some more sometime. Jin finished his statement with a smile and Sanji smirked back at him, his happiness at the compliment easily seen on his face. Anytime. I'll have a seat waiting for you. Waitress. Sanji. Zeph's voice echoed down from the second floor and Luffy flinched slightly before turning to look at the middle-aged man resting against the railing on the second floor. So here you are. Zeph's eyes slid to the empty plate and cup sitting on the deck as Sanji turned to fully face the head chef. Get going, Jin, he said after a few seconds of staring up at Zeph. Jin slapped a hand gently against his forehead and looked bowed in shame. He didn't want his rescuer to get in trouble because he had helped him. I'm sorry. You're gonna get in trouble for letting me eat for free. Jin felt terrible but Sanji just snorted and rolled his eyes. Whatever. Luffy watched from her perch on the railing as Sanji slowly made his way over to the dirty dishes before he picked them up and tossed them off the deck and into the ocean. Jin stared at the spot where the dishes had vanished, shocked, before he turned to look up at Sanji again. They don't have any proof now, do they? So there's no reason for me to get yelled at. Sanji just continued to grin, his happy smile causing Jin to start tearing up. No one had ever done something so kind for him before, and he sniffled slightly as he stared at Sanji. A man he barely knew had saved his life and risked his job to help him and he couldn't be more grateful. Luffy watched their interaction with a soft smile on her face. She knew there was a reason she had liked the blonde chef so much. Sanji really was a good person. Jin released the sails and allowed the boat to start drifting away from the Bharati. Don't get caught again, Jin. Sanji chuckled, waving to the departing man. Jin just dropped to his knees and bowed his head forward in a show of gratitude. Thank you, Sanji. I won't forget this. Both Sanji and Luffy watched until the small boat was nothing more than a mere dot on the horizon. Luffy smiled again before turning to grin happily at Sanji. It was official now, she was going to make sure that Sanji was the chef on her ship. When Sanji noticed that Luffy was smiling at him he began to dance around her, hearts in his eyes as he spouted out compliments on the beauty of Luffy's smile and her overall angelic appearance. Luffy just blinked in confusion and opened her mouth to ask what was wrong with Sanji when Zeph yelled down at the both of them. Sanji, get back to work now, waitress, follow me. With those words, Zeph turned on his heel and re-entered the restaurant, leaving Sanji and Luffy staring after him. The blonde chef just sighed and put out his cigarette on the railing. Come on Luffy-chan, we should probably get going before the old man has a stroke or something. Sanji led Luffy up the stairs to Zeph's room, the same place that she had been brought earlier, before giving her a kiss on the hand and leaving her so he could get back to his own work. But not before he had picked a fight with the old man in an effort to defend the innocence of the angelic maiden, or something like that. He had held his own against the head chef and Luffy was happy to see that her new crewmate was not only a good chef, but was strong too. Strong. 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 I wonder what Zoro's doing right now. Luffy allowed herself to get swept away in her own thoughts as she waited for Zeph to return with whatever item he said he had to get. She hadn't seen Zoro or the others since Jin had first arrived and she was curious if they were still in the restaurant or if they had gone back to Mary. I wonder why. Luffy was pulled back to the present when Zeph stormed into the room, a large white box held in his hands. Zeph had originally been planning for the girl to just do things around the kitchen such as cleaning and restocking, but he had to admit that his little eggplant was right about one thing. This Luffy girl really was pretty. Maybe he could use that to get better tips out of the male clientele. Here, with a grin, he shoved the box into Luffy's arms, causing the girl to stumble back slightly before she stared down at the object curiously. Was it a gift? She didn't know why the old chef was giving her things, but Luffy wasn't going to complain. Excited, she lifted the lid off the box and yanked out a few sheets of tissue paper before staring down at the revealed item with a look of frustration. Clothing. And not just any clothing, it looked like a dress. This is as bad as when Makino kept trying to dress me up. Why would this old geezer give me a dress? Why not meat or something cool? She gave Zeph a sullen look, a pout on her face. Why are you giving me clothes? She said the word as if it was one of the most vile things in the world. It's your uniform. You're going to work here, so you need a Bharati uniform. Luffy's eyes narrowed as she scanned the item again before she glared up at Zeph. Is it a dress? Luffy hated dresses. Never again would she wear one. Not after all the teasing her brothers had given her after Makino forced her into that god-awful pink one. Zeph raised an eyebrow at the girl's angry tone. Didn't women like wearing dresses or receiving clothing? No, it's a skirt, blouse, and shoes. Are you sure? The girl asked seriously. Zeph threw his hands up in exasperation and let out an annoyed huff. Yes, I'm bloody sure. Now put the damn thing on and get to work. The anger on Luffy's face immediately vanished and she grinned. Okay. As long as it was anything other than a dress she was fine. She set the box on a chair and began to quickly unbutton her shirt. Luffy had reached the last one when an indignant shout of, "Stop," caused her to freeze. She tilted her head at Zeph who was staring at her, red-faced and flustered, a confused look on her own face. "What?" she asked, honestly confused by the chef's reaction. "You told me to put it on." The chef growled at the oblivious girl. Surely no one could be this naive and stupid. Wait until I leave at least. Great seas lass, have you no shame? Luffy blinked. Shame? What's that? Is it good? Zeph racked a hand over his face and let out a defeated sigh. Just put on the uniform, he said tiredly. Grumbling under his breath, he exited the room, allowing the door to slam behind him. He was honestly getting too old for things like this. Nami slammed her glass to the table with no small amount of force, causing Usopp, who had been wolfing down some pasta, to jump and choke. Ignoring the choking sharpshooter, the fiery orangeette shot a furious glare at the third person at the table. Will you stop? She snapped, her eyes attempting to burn holes into the green-haired swordsman's face. You're annoying the crap out of me. Zoro, who had been absent-mindedly tapping at the table with his fingers for the past few minutes, scowled at the orangeette but relented. Instead, he crossed his arms over his chest and leaned back on the legs of his chair, a sullen look on his face. I haven't seen Luffy since they tossed that guy outside, he growled, reaching over and slapping a rapidity-turning blue Usopp on the back. Our first priority should be finding her, not eating lunch. His eyes swept the dining room once again and narrowed when he noticed the blonde chef moving between the tables. Nami followed Zoro's gaze before rolling her eyes. Honestly, for someone with a reputation for being a cold demon, Zoro could be such an overprotective pansy. I'm sure Luffy's fine, Nami eventually said, her tone dismissive as she handed Usopp a glass of water. Although, you keep up this possessive streak and even our scatter-brained captain is going to catch on to your not-so-subtle feelings. Zoro narrowed his eyes the nonchalant navigator. Can you blame me? I take my eyes off her for a second and she gets into trouble. Nami opened her mouth, but then closed it. No, when it came to Luffy she really couldn't blame the swordsman. Since the navigator had joined the crew, Luffy had seemed to get into more trouble than what appeared to be physically possible for a girl her size. Who knew how bad it was before she had joined them? Usopp wiped the last few tears from his eyes and coughed a little, still struggling to get air into his lungs. Still going a bit overboard there. He pointed out, waving his fork in the swordsman's direction. Honestly, if it wasn't for the fact that Luffy was naive and as oblivious as a child, the green-haired first mate wouldn't be getting away with all of the crap he had been pulling for the past few days. Zoro just shrugged, waving off their concern. However, any further converses mall commotion coming from the other side of the dining room. The long-nosed teen cast a wary glance to where a series of exclamations were sounding. He really hoped it wasn't another incident like earlier. He preferred to eat his food in stress-free conditions, and he really didn't want to choke again. Wow, looking good. Nami blinked when a wolf whistle cut through the air. The orangeette had never been in any sort of fight that started out with sounds like that and, curious, she turned to look over at the crowd of people on the opposite side of the dining area. Ah, she's so adorable. I want to hug her, a woman shrieked. Zoro raised a brow and shared a look with Nami. For some reason, he had this odd feeling that whatever was going on had something to do with his captain. The swordsman craned his neck as well in an attempt to see what was going on, but the circular staircase in the center of the restaurant blocked both of their views. On the other side of the room, Luffy was having the most bizarre experience of her life. She had changed into the uniform thing that the old chef had given her and then he had told her to go back to the dining area and pick up dirty dishes. Luffy had thought that she might be able to steal some leftover food off of some of the plates. But now that she was down there, it looked like that wasn't gonna happen. She pouted slightly and a woman near her let out a dreamy, "Ah." All of the women were looking at her and whispering, some of them giving her looks like the ones Makino used to give her when the green-haired woman tried to get her into dresses and other girly clothes. Luffy was currently doing her best to avoid those women. The head chef had already forced her into a skirt, which Luffy had now determined was almost as bad as a dress, and she had no desire to be dragged into trying on more clothes. On the other end of the spectrum, the guys were acting even weirder. In the raven-haired girl's opinion, they were all looking at her like they were hungry, which was confusing her. If they were hungry, why weren't they eating? There was perfectly good meat on the plates in front of them, but they just kept staring at her. As Luffy passed by one table, she snatched an uneaten steak off of one of the plates and quickly ate it whole, licking her fingers as she continued to move past the tables. "Hey miss, I'm done," came a shout from a table near her. A brown-haired man was waving his arm in the air and beckoning Luffy over to him when another man interrupted him. "You're not done, there's still food on your plate," the second man yelled, glaring at the brunette before turning to smile sweetly at Luffy. "Miss, just ignore him. On the other hand, am most definitely done." He swept a hand out to gesture at his cleaned plate and the first man glared. "You ass, if I say I'm done, I'm done. You still have vegetables on your plate. I hate peas and carrots. Then why the hell did you order them, you stupid she?" The rest of his sentence was cut off as the brunette tackled the second man to the ground. Luffy watched the two grapple on the floor, her gaze interested before her attention was grabbed by a brunette waving her over. "Oi, I'm actually done over here. So am I actually want to order, so I'm more important." "You son of a, what the hell does that mean? You're so cute, would you like to be my new daughter?" "Mom." More than a little disturbed, Luffy hurried away from what she had now deemed the crazy side of the restaurant, never once looking back. Nami felt her eye twitch as yet another fight, or at least a very small scuffle, broke out on the other side of the room. She was very confused, and more than a little annoyed by the noise, and was silently wondering what had turned such a calm and fancy-looking restaurant into a crazy cafeteria. "Do you think it's another pirate?" Usopp asked warily, giving the food in front of him a longing glance before shaking himself roughly. He would not eat until he was sure there would be no more surprises. He didn't need to start choking again, and have Zoro break his back in the swordsman's attempt to help him. Seriously, that man was a monster and hit like a bull. "I doubt it." Zoro murmured, his eye narrowed in confusion. His sharp ears had picked up the entire conversation, but for the life of him he did not know what to make of it. That is until about a second later Zoro gaped. Usopp choked, air this time. Nami squealed. Actually squealed. There was their captain, their Luffy, hurrying across the room towards them with a disturbed look on her face. But that wasn't what caught their attention. No, it was more of what their captain was wearing that caught their eyes. Luffy, who had heard Nami's squeal, turned to where her nakama were sighting, all three of them staring at her in a semi-daze. Her freaked-out expression melted away into one of happiness before it turned to shock and then finally settled on anger. She stomped over to their table, her hands balled into fists at her sides and her cheeks puffed out as she glared at them fiercely. "I can't believe you jerks are eating without me," she snapped, eyeing the food with a hungry expression. Her stomach growled slightly and she let her pout deepen. Luffy's shout seemed to knock her crew from their daze and the she-captain gasped as she was suddenly caught in a vice hug between two of her crewmates. "You're so cute," Usopp and Nami squealed in unison. Poor Luffy could only blink in shock as both hugged her tightly, her own gaze going to Zoro, as if asking her first mate what was going on. Around the rest of the restaurant, the other diners who had vied for Luffy's attention shot jealous glares at Usopp and Nami. After another few seconds, Nami finally drew away from the raven-haired girl, pulling Usopp with her so she could get a better look at the she-pirate's outfit. Nami's eyes swept up and down Luffy's frame as she clapped her hands together and brought them up to her mouth, a bright grin on her face. "Oh, you are so adorable looking," she gushed. The clothing that Luffy wore was a classic waitress outfit of white and blue. The top was a short sleeve, button-up white shirt with a lace collar and a pale blue neckerchief tied at the throat. The sleeves were pressed and rolled up, the edges lined with navy blue. The skirt was a matching pale blue color lined with navy blue and puffed out before stopping just a bit past mid-thigh. The outfit had come with a matching blue cap, but Luffy had refused to wear it. Instead, her iconic straw hat was on her head, but Nami was happy to say that the out-of-place item didn't detract from the raven-haired girl's cuteness but actually accented it. Finally, a white lace apron was draped over the outfit and tied around Luffy's waist with a navy blue ribbon, the Barati's Jolly Roger embroidered on the front. Nami's eyes did one final sweep of the outfit before she finally noticed the she-pirate's choice of footwear. "Luffy," Nami cried, dismayed. "Don't you have anything better to wear than those ratty old sandals? Didn't he give you any shoes?" "They were evil," Luffy stated, crossing her arms over her chest and puffing out her cheeks angrily. "They hurt my feet and I couldn't run. My sandals are comfy." Nami opened her mouth to argue, but Usopp just waved a dismissive hand in her face. "Ah, just leave it. She still looks adorable." Nami scowled at him. "I'm not saying she doesn't. I'm just saying that she would look better if she wore the shoes that actually go with the outfit." She tapped a finger against her lip thoughtfully. "I think I might have a good pair on the ship. Ooh, we really need to go shopping next island. You'd look so cute in some new clothes, Luffy." Luffy just grumbled and looked away from the orangeette as Nami continued to ramble. She was acting just like Makino used to. Why did people always want to dress her up? She liked the clothes she had now, they were comfy. And clothes shopping? Count her out. Luffy was only interested in food shopping. Anything else was just Buffy's gaze slid to Zoro, who was still staring at her blankly. The raven-haired girl blinked a few times, feeling her cheeks heat up slightly. "Why is Zoro staring? Do I have something on my face? I do feel kinda warm. Is he okay?" She tapped her fingers against her cheek, testing the temperature and hoping she wasn't getting sick. Luffy had never really been sick before, but Ace had come down with the flu once and it hadn't looked like much fun. Her face felt warm, but Luffy could swear that she felt fine, so why was Zoro staring? "Zoro," Luffy eventually whined, stepping up to her first mate and tugging on the edge of his sleeve. "Make her stop." Luffy calling his name finally snapped the swordsman out of his daze, and his eyes darted up to Luffy's pouting face. His own cheeks darkened slightly before he turned to glare at the navigator, one arm moving to rest against Luffy's lower back and pulling the raven-haired girl closer. "Oi, Nami. Quit being a pain. You're bugging Luffy." The redhead snapped out of her shopping plans and glared at the swordsman, only to see that he was once again staring up at Luffy. The raven-haired girl was grinning down at her first mate, but Nami could see the slight reddening of the girl's cheeks and it gave her an idea. It seemed Luffy wasn't as completely oblivious as they all thought. The raven-haired girl appeared to be developing a bit of a crush on her first mate, and Nami had a feeling that all the girl needed was a jump start of her own. The orangette's expression turned mischievous. "Nay Zoro," she purred, sharing a look with an equally mischievous Usopp. "What do you think of the captain's new attire?" Zoro's head snapped over to his grinning crewmates and his eyes narrowed as a dark flush began to spread across his face. They were up to something. He recognized that look on the navigator's face, and it wasn't a good one. Hadn't they just gotten done telling him that he needed to tone it down? His gaze narrowed slightly. "They're up to something." "Yeah, Zoro." Usopp snickered, quickly going along with Nami's unspoken plan. "Inquiring minds want to know." Zoro shot him a look that clearly said, "I could break your neck," but Usopp only smirked at him. He'd been hanging out with Nami too long. Damn it. "Well, Zoro," Nami continued, trying to stifle her giggles at the look on the swordsman's face. The man looked like he was caught between a rock and a hard place and wasn't sure which was worse. "I'm sure Luffy wants to know what you think of her outfit." For once, Luffy actually agreed with Nami. She didn't much care for the outfit, but the way Zoro had stared at her made her a little self-conscious. Did her swordsman like it? Luffy wanted to change, but if it meant that Zoro's cheeks would stay that reddish color that the she-pirate found adorable, then she might keep wearing it. It was a new feeling and one that she wasn't quite sure what to do with. She gave Nami a slightly confused look, her expression darting between the older girl and her swordsman. Nami just smiled at the she-pirate and nodded before gesturing back to the floundering green-haired teen. The orangeette would definitely need to have a talk with the she-pirate later. It seemed that Luffy had no idea that she was starting to fall for her swordsman. Zoro eventually said, looking anywhere but at Luffy. "It's not cute." Swordsman did not find things cute. She did look adorable though. Zoro had thought that Luffy couldn't get any cuter than when she held her hat and smiled at him in her normal outfit, but it appeared that he was mistaken. It's my angel. The members of the Straw Hats, except for Zoro who just growled and tightened his hold on Luffy, jumped at the unexpected shout. Sanji danced his way over to their table and circled around Luffy before kneeling in front of the grinning she-pirate. Absolutely gorgeous. The flowing white that complements your innocence and the deep blue of your passion. You set my soul alight, angel. Both Nami and Usopp just stared at the blonde chef blankly before Usopp began to laugh. Nami's lips twitched and she hid her grin in her glass of water. Hey Sanji, meet the rest of our crew. This is Zoro, Usopp. Nami interrupted, slamming her glass down and stabbed her finger in Sanji's direction. Wait, Luffy? The raven-haired girl grinned and nodded her head happily. Yeah, Sanji's going to join our crew and be our chef. Sweet, you got a chef for us. Usopp cheered, giving the she-pirate a thumbs up. Nice one, Luffy. Before Luffy could respond to Usopp's compliment, Sanji stepped away from the raven-haired girl and flung himself onto the floor before Nami, holding a rose out to the orangeette. Oh, beauty of beauties, could it be? He waxed, hearts appearing in his eyes. Have my prayers led me to this fair goddess? A lady of such fiery loveliness and such explosive splendor. My dearest Melorine. Nami raised a brow down at Sanji, not quite sure what was going on with the blonde chef before the orangeette turned to Luffy, who just shrugged, a grin on her face. Sanji does that a lot, she supplied helpfully. Nami just let out a and turned back to where the kneeling chef was still spouting poetry. As long as I can be with you, I'm prepared to walk across any path, be it the path of a pirate or a devil. But, oh such epic tragedy! He cried, hiding his face in his hands after Nami eventually took the rose. The obstacles between us are many and great. To think that I would be allowed to gaze upon your divine visage but be unable to grant your deepest wishes. Such torture. Nami looked from the despairing cook back to her captain once again. What is he talking about? She whispered, bringing one hand up to cup her mouth. Well, Luffy sighed, crossing her arms over her chest. I want him to be our chef, but he says he can't join the crew. But good. The icy tone of Zoro's voice had all the occupants at the table turning towards him. Nami felt herself smirk as she guessed what must have pissed off the swordsman so bad. Sanji had already been on shaky ground with the swordsman after his stunt of catching Luffy earlier, and his fawning was not helping his case. The first mate sipped at his glass of water, a dark scowl on his face as he tried to force himself to remain calm. Sanji, who had been snapped out his dreamy state, sent the greenhead a glare as icy as Zoro's tone. You got a problem, Marimo? He sneered, his demeanor instantly returning to that of a thug who enjoyed fighting. Zoro set his drink down with a cluck and matched the cook's glare with one of his own. Yeah, we don't need an idiot messing up the dynamics of the crew. Sanji's visible eye narrowed. One apparently is enough. Zoro's glare turned glacier and Usopp shivered as he felt the dark energy seeming to emanate from the swordsman. Not to be outdone, Sanji's glare also deepened and sparks began to clash in the space between the two men. Luffy's eyes darted between the two men, watching their interaction curiously. Sanji and Zoro seem to be getting along, I'm glad. The raven-haired girl clapped her hands together happily before her gaze was drawn down to the plate of food in front of Zoro. Luffy grinned brightly at the sight of the steak and potatoes and, after taking one last glance at the glaring men and making sure that they were occupied, she plopped herself down on the swordsman's lap. Luffy's sudden movement instantly dispersed the tension that had been building around the table, and all of the occupants turned to look at her with varying expressions of surprise. Geez, Lou, Zoro hissed, flailing back slightly and glaring down at the raven-haired girl who was currently making herself comfortable in her makeshift seat. You guys were gonna eat without me, Luffy pouted, grabbing a fork and stabbing it into the piece of steak. Zoro's arms came up around her, one resting against Luffy's stomach so that the girl wouldn't fall off his lap, and the other moving to grab the fork from her. This is my food. Get your own, Lou. G down the flush that was spreading across his face as his grip on the raven-haired girl tightened. Zoro, no, Luffy pouted up at her first mate, and when the swordsman refused to budge she stuck out her tongue in retaliation. Zoro's lips twitched in a small grin and he returned the childish gesture, causing Luffy to giggle, the corners of her eyes crinkling. "Geez, you two, get a room." Usopp's annoyed snort caused Zoro's head to whip towards the long-nosed teen, his shock causing his grip on the fork to loosen. Luffy quickly saw her opening and snatched the utensil back before taking a huge bite of the well-done steak. "Wah! Luffy!" Nami began to laugh and Usopp quickly joined in, their giggles causing Zoro's scowl to deepen. His gaze slid to the blonde chef, who was glaring at him slightly, and he grinned in triumph before turning his attention back to the raven-haired she-pirate in his lap. The idiot chef could flirt with his captain as long as he wanted. Luffy would still be Zoro's. Nami sighed at the proud grin on the first mate's face and noticed that the blonde newcomer seemed to be getting annoyed. "I'd better head this off. No need to start a fight in the restaurant," she thought, frowning. "Still, Luffy owes me for this." "Sanji, was it?" Nami's voice dragged the blonde chef back to the other girl at the table and he smiled brightly before kneeling back in front of her. "Yes, my beautiful lady? I'm honored and flattered that you remembered my name." The blonde chef took Nami's hands in both of his and placed a kiss to the back of one. Nami fought the urge to roll her eyes as Sanji continued speaking. "Ah, what I would give to be able to follow you and attend to your every whim, Melorine, but alas, a terrible obstacle stands in our way. And that obstacle would be me, right Sanji?" Zeph appeared behind Sanji, leaning against an empty chair at another table. His question informed Sanji and the Straw Hats that he had been listening into their conversation. "Ah, it's the geezer," Sanji muttered, glaring back at his mentor as he let Nami's hands drop back to her lap. "This is a good opportunity for you. Why don't you join them and be a pirate already?" Zeph tilted his head slightly, watching Sanji with an almost curious look on his face. The blonde opened his mouth to respond, a furious look on his face, but before he could say anything the head chef continued. "I have no need to keep you here in my restaurant." The last words were quiet but clear and the Straw Hats all looked up at the middle-aged man in shock, not quite sure why the head chef would say something like that to his second-in-command. While they were shocked, Sanji looked almost ready to kill. Meanwhile, on an uninhabited island located not too far away from the Bharati, a rundown ship bobbed in the water, anchored between two rocks large enough to conceal it from view. Tied to the side of the ship was the small boat that Sanji had given to Jin. In a cave on the edge of the island rested the crew of the rundown ship and Jin knelt in front of an ornate chair where a shadowed man sat. "I see, this cook saved your life, and that is how you were able to return here to us. Is that what you're saying, Jin?" the shadowed man asked, drumming his fingers impatiently on the arm of the chair. "Why yes, but I had no idea that the main ship was in this condition, Don Krieg. So what shall we do now?" Jin's expression was troubled and he glanced around the shadowed cave worriedly. "Now, I think we should go to this sea restaurant Bharati, after all, I feel quite famished." Then the man smirked darkly began to laugh, the sound echoing through the dark cave. From his kneeling position Jin stared at the dirt floor beneath him, guilt and shame written all over his face. "Forgive me, Sanji. Don Krieg, ruler of the East Blue." The restaurant was tense as Sanji and Zeph stared each other down, shocked expressions on everyone's faces. Most of the customers were holding their breath and wondering what the head chef would say next. Some of the chefs had come down from the second floor and were standing on the central staircase, watching the altercation. Many of them were snickering at the livid expression on Sanji's face, and Luffy frowned at them curiously before turning her attention back to the two men in front of her. Her crew all wore similar expressions of curiosity and remained sitting at their table, content to watch the altercation from the front row. Sanji heard the snickering and glared up at the other chefs as Zeph began to talk again. "The other cooks don't like you anyway." Sanji's eyes snapped back to Zeph and his gaze narrowed as Zeph continued. "Why don't you just become a pirate or whatever you please? Why don't you just get the hell out of here?" Zoro rested one arm against the back of his chair as he listened to Zeph's words, still making sure to keep Luffy in his sight. Sanji's eyes narrowed even further and his teeth ground together. "What's this crap?" he snarled. "I didn't do shit and now you're blowing your head off, you old fart?" Zeph crossed his arms over his chest but didn't say anything. "I don't care about the rest of your excuses, but I'll never allow my cooking to be insulted. I don't care what the hell you're going to say." I'm gonna stay right here as a chef. As Sanji spoke, he stormed forward until he was nose to nose with Zeph. Angrily, he grabbed the tie of the man's neckerchief with one hand and shook him. If you don't like it, that's your problem. How dare you hit your boss? Zeph snapped, his arms still crossed. The head chef appeared to be completely calm, but in the blink of an eye he had broken Sanji's hold on him and was grabbing the blonde chef instead. You stupid eggplant! The older chef shouted, throwing Sanji over his shoulder and causing the man to slam into the table Luffy's crew was sitting at. Luckily, Usopp and Nami had noticed the way that the argument seemed to be going and had managed to grab their food before Sanji broke the legs of the table. Damn it! Are you kidding? Sanji forced himself into a sitting position, one hand braced against the floor. No matter how hard you may try, I'm going to stay here as a chef. Zeph just turned and began to walk away, rolling his eyes as if he was annoyed, but the small quirk of his lips said otherwise. Till the day you go to hell, I won't die. Zeph retaliated, still walking. I'll live another 100 years. What a stubborn old man. Luffy danced forward and leaned down next to Sanji, a bright grin on her face. Isn't this great? She giggled, poking the blonde chef on the cheek in a teasing manner. The old man gave you his blessing. Now you can come with us. Sanji brushed off Luffy's gentle prodding and rose to his feet before turning to fix the table that he had knocked over. I'm sorry, Luffy-chan, but like I said before, I can't leave. I have to stay here. Luffy started to pout and Sanji hastened to comfort her. Here, let me give you and your lovely friend something to make up for all of this hassle. He guided Luffy to one of the seats next to Nami before setting a fruit macedonia in front of both of the girls, glistening sugar decorating the tip of the glass. He began to pour a glass of wine for Nami, but when he turned to do the same for Luffy, the girl just wrinkled her nose and shook her head. As an apology, I've ordered the both of you a fruit macedonia. My angel, my princess. He bowed slightly to both girls, grinning slightly at the happy expression on Luffy's face. Why, thank you. Nami thanked, clapping her hands together and beaming at the blonde chef. You're so kind. It's nothing, princess. While Usopp was giving Luffy and Nami his undivided attention, Usopp stormed over to their side of the table, looking particularly annoyed. What's this? He snapped, his voice loud. You're not apologizing to us. I'll sue you, you stupid love cook. Sanji gave the long-nosed teen an unimpressed look before shoving a cup of tea at him. I brought you some tea, isn't that enough? You should thank me, long nose. Huh? A vein appeared on Usopp's head. You picking a fight? I won't be easy on you. Sanji just continued to watch Usopp with an almost bored expression on his face, appearing unimpressed with the teen's tough guy act. Usopp ground his teeth together. Get him, Zoro, Usopp called, turning to stare at the swordsman, one hand curled into a fist above the blonde chef, his thumb pointing down at the other man. Zoro just snorted and gulped down a bit of the tea that Sanji had set in front of him. Do it yourself. Zoro wanted to pick a fight with the blonde. He was angry and frustrated with the way the man had been treating his captain, and it was making him short-tempered. But for Luffy's sake he would try to get along with the idiot cook. Luffy wanted the blonde moron on the crew and as first mate, he would support her. His gaze moved to the raven-haired girl and smirked slightly at the look of happiness on her face as she shoved another spoonful of the fruity dessert into her mouth. Nami, having been stuck between Usopp and Sanji, twined her hands together and stared up at the blonde chef with a pleading expression on her face. Please, don't fight over us, she begged, smiling up at Sanji, her expression manipulative. Very well, princess. I'll stop. Sanji cooed, hearts in his eyes as he stared down at Nami. Usopp, on the other hand, just rolled his eyes and snapped. Who's fighting over you? By the way, Nami began, ignoring Usopp and turning her full attention to the love-struck cook. Yes, darling? The food here's great, but it's a bit expensive for Luffy and I. Sanji ducked down closer to Nami, heart still in his eyes as the girl caressed his chin in a loving manner. Zoro snorted slightly and took another drink. Poor fool's playing right into her hands, but maybe the witch will keep his attention off of Luffy. Of course, Sanji sighed, swooning slightly. I won't make you two lovely ladies pay. Thank you. Nami cheered, hugging Sanji to her. The blonde chef's expression cleared for a second and he turned his gaze to Usopp and Zoro. You guys have to pay though. Wah? Usopp choked on his words, looking completely outraged, but Zoro just sweat dropped at the cook's stupidity. I already saw that coming, he muttered sarcastically. Luffy began to giggle happily, finally paying attention to the scene at the other side of the table now that she had finished her dessert. She left the spoon in her mouth and began to play with it, causing the end to move up and down as she manipulated it with her tongue. Luffiko-chan, Sanji eventually called, causing the girl to look over at the blonde chef. As much as I love seeing you enjoying my food, we need to get back to work before the old geezer blows a gasket. Luffy sighed, a small whine coming from her mouth as she set down the spoon. Sanji was right though, she still hadn't found a way to convince the old man to let her go in a week. Fine, she muttered, standing up and brushing her hands down the button-up shirt and pale blue skirt that she wore. Let's go, Sanji. As she passed Nami, Luffy snatched the Orangette's fruit Macedonia and began to wolf it down as she made her way back to the kitchen. Luffy, Nami's protest was only half-hearted and she laughed slightly as Sanji followed after the raven-haired girl, dancing around the small girl with hearts swirling around him. Are you still hungry, Luffiko-chan? Don't worry, after our shift I'll make you a full 5-course meal seasoned with my love and affection. Zoro frowned slightly and glared at the man's back, but thankfully, Luffy continued to ignore him. After they rounded the corner, Nami, Usopp, and Zoro turned to look at each other, each of them wearing similar expressions. Luffy really had a knack for Rand. Once she set her sights on someone, they were joining the crew whether they wanted to or not. The idea of a pirate hunter and a pirate thief on a pirate crew was proof enough. After a few seconds, Zoro shrugged and went back to his food. Whatever Luffy decided, she was his captain and he would follow her lead. Almost a week had passed since the Straw Hat crew reached the Bharati and they were still no closer to leaving. Usopp dropped back against the deck of the Going Merry with a sigh, following the slowly moving clouds with his eyes. Nami appeared almost as bored as the long-nosed sniper and had challenged Johnny and Yosaku to what felt like 2 million poker games in an effort to keep herself entertained. It wasn't really helping to relieve her boredom, but she had managed to earn a decent amount of money from the two so-called bounty hunters. I'm bored, Usopp eventually whined, scratching his head. It's been 4 days. How soon can we leave, y'all think? Beats me, Zoro growled back, glaring at Usopp as he adjusted the swords attached to his belt. His mood had been foul ever since that first day when they had all that commotion with Jin and the stupid cooks. The way everyone had been looking at Luffy was irritating him, and that stupid love cook was the worst. The way he fawned all over Luffy and the way he touched her infuriated him so much he wanted to cut the blonde moron into pieces. The only thing that stopped him was Luffy's insistence that he was going to join their crew and her inability to understand the flirting and comments directed her way. Her innocence and naivety really was a blessing for the swordsman. Still, he hoped that she hurried up. They had already been there too long, but so far it seemed like their captain hadn't made any progress with the old man Zeph. When I heard that the head chef wanted to make her stay here for a whole year, it blew my mind. You don't think she'll actually be stuck here for a year, right? Usopp completely ignored Zoro's glare as he continued to talk, having gotten used to the first mate's irritable mood after the first 2 days. I'm already so bored. What's wrong with a year? Nami asked, finally joining in on the conversation now that she had cleared out the 2 pirate hunters in front of her. We've got great food, a good atmosphere, and… Yeah, for you and Lou maybe, Zoro snapped, obviously annoyed as he made his way towards the side of the ship. Nami just chuckled, knowing that the swordsman was really just jealous and frustrated with all of the attention that Luffiko had been receiving lately. I'm going to the restaurant, he muttered, jumping to the pier, his words causing Usopp, Johnny and Yosaku to start laughing. Big bro's jealous. Big bro's jealous, Yosuke and Johnny chanted, rolling around on the floor as they shouted. Shut up, morons. The swordsman snarled, fighting back the flush that was coming to his cheeks. What did I say earlier? I'll kick all your asses again. He turned back as if he was going to jump back on the Going Merry when Usopp chimed in. You should hurry, Zoro. Who knows what kind of guys are hitting on Luffiko already? What if they offer her food? Zoro scowled, glaring darkly at the 3 laughing teens before storming off towards the restaurant without another word. He really is too easy, Nami sighed, tapping her fingers lightly against her forehead. Sanji rolled his eyes as the door to the restaurant slammed open and the green-haired pirate hunter sauntered into the restaurant, looking annoyed. Without even waiting to be seated, he stormed over to the closest empty table and threw himself into a chair before propping his feet up on the edge of the table. That movement made Sanji bristle and he opened his mouth to yell at the inconsiderate bastard but was cut off when another voice rang out. "Zoro!" A blur shot past Sanji and he watched, annoyed, as Luffiko ran towards the scowling swordsman with a bright grin on her face. The temporary waitress was waving her arms over her head in greeting and Zoro opened his own in response, smirking slightly when the raven-haired girl dove into him. Zoro chuckled at Luffy's enthusiasm, shifting his hold on the she-pirate until she was resting comfortably in his lap even as she chattered away. "Zoro's late today, are the others coming? Are you hungry? I can bring you food. You should get steak. And then give me some. I'm hungry. It's really boring here." Zoro didn't respond, just brought a hand up and began to pet the girl's hair, content to listen to her babble. Sanji scoffed, fighting back his frustration as he turned away and began to light one of his cigarettes. That green-haired moron didn't deserve the attention he was receiving from Luffiko-chan. The swordsman was rude, uncouth, and had no respect for women based on the way he treated the beautiful Nami-chan, but yet whenever he appeared Luffiko-chan was immediately at his side. The blonde chef took a drag of the freshly lit cigarette before letting out a huff. Why women were drawn to brutes like him he would never know, but thankfully the lovely Nami Swan wasn't fooled by the green-haired bounty hunter. Ah, the lovely Nami Swan. A breath of fresh air that I have been long deprived of. I hope that the Marimo's presence means that my angel will be joining us soon. Excuse me. The soft voice drew Sanji out of his daydream and he focused his attention back to the table where the Marimo was once again alone. Sanji quickly scanned the crowded restaurant for a flash of the golden straw hat that the bubbly girl always wore but didn't see her. Sanji couldn't believe that Luffiko-chan had snuck past him without him noticing. She was normally so loud you could find the girl in a crowd. He turned his attention back to where a pretty brunette girl had approached the table and was standing in front of the green-haired swordsman. The girl looked to be about 18 years old, with shoulder-length wavy brown hair and hazel eyes. She wore a deep green tunic that was laced in the back and stopped just above her knees and a pair of black leggings. The girl was shifting nervously from foot to foot, her hands clasped in front of her and her eyes downcast. By contrast, Zoro looked completely relaxed. The former bounty hunter was leaning back against his chair, his arms laced behind his head and his feet crossed on the table in front of him. He watched the fidgeting girl with an almost uninterested expression that infuriated Sanji. How dare the stupid swordsman treat such a lovely lady like she was nothing more than a wall decoration. A lady like that should be treated with grace and worship like the jewel she was. Are you Mr. Roronoa? The girl's eyes flicked up to Zoro's face and she blushed before glancing back down at her feet. Zoro just scoffed at the girl's soft question. This wasn't the first time that some girl had walked up to him and decided to confess her love. It had happened multiple times over the past few years, but each time was the same. It almost pissed him off how timid the girls who approached him were. Nothing like my captain. I hope Lu gets back soon. A small twitch broke through Zoro's uninterested facade as he thought of the bubbly she-pirate. The smirk quickly faded as he focused back on the girl in front of him. Yeah, that's me. What do you want? The girl fidgeted a little more. I was wondering. Speak up, I'm not going to attack you or anything. Geez. Zoro moved his hands from behind his head and crossed them in front of his chest, raising one eyebrow at the brunette girl. God, he could barely hear her. Ah, sorry, the girl muttered, flinching slightly before she forced herself to stand up straighter. I'm Tara. I've been following you in the paper for years. You became a bounty hunter at 15, right? Why did you start bounty hunting? Great. Someone who wants to ask questions. Damn it, why did Lu insist on going for food now? It's personal. You dropped off the map after Shell's town. What have you been doing since then? Nothing. I have really loved following Yo. Have dinner with me tonight? Just the two of us? Zoro's eye twitched slightly. Couldn't this girl get the hint that he wasn't interested? It almost made him laugh. Girls like this were so persistent and clingy, and yet Luffy didn't seem to have any sort of romantic interest at all. He really had picked one hell of a challenge when he decided to join Luffy's crew. The swordsman snorted and shook his head, drawing himself out of his thoughts and returning his attention to the waiting brunette. Not interested. Sorry. Tara flinched slightly at Zoro's short reply and the curt tone, but instead of beating a hasty retreat, she took a few steps forward and lifted a hand, intending to touch Zoro's shoulder. Surely, she could convince him if she just tried. Come on, please. Slim fingers suddenly wrapped around the girl's wrist, stopping her fingers inches from Zoro's shoulder. The brunette turned her head, eyes wide with surprise, and saw Luffy standing on the opposite side of the table. A large tray of food had been placed on the table in front of the raven-haired girl, further confirming where the raven-haired girl had gone earlier. The she-pirate's gaze was focused completely on Tara and her face was contorted with a confused look, as if Luffy herself didn't understand her own reaction. She let her grip on the brunette girl's wrist loosen before dropping her hand altogether. Zoro said he's not interested. Luffy muttered, frowning at the other girl. She still couldn't understand why she had grabbed the brunette girl in the first place. She had seen the girl near Zoro and it felt like her heart had stopped. The last time Luffy had felt anything close to this was when she thought that she had lost Ace back when they were kids. But Zoro was important too. He was her swordsman and Luffy wouldn't stand for anyone trying to take him away. Tara turned to face the she-pirate, glaring slightly at the smaller girl. No one asked your opinion, waitress. Get back to your job, little girl. Zoro's eyes narrowed at the brunette's sneer and he fought back the urge to growl. He had put up with the girl, Tara, when she had just been bugging him, but if she dared to go against Luffy, he wouldn't be as nice. Hey, he snapped, dropping his feet from the table and leaning forward slightly, prepared to move to Luffy's defense if he needed to. Not that the girl needed any assistance in a fight, but things like this were a different story. His captain wasn't very well versed in social customs and Zoro wasn't sure if she knew what to do in this kind of situation. His fingers itched to grip his katana, but he fought back the urge when he saw Luffy tilt her head to the side, not looking particularly upset, just confused. She giggled softly, further angering the brunette girl. I know, but you didn't seem to have heard him. Maybe you just weren't listening. I do that sometimes. It bugs Nami when I zone out, but I zhoo. A loud slap cut off the rest of Luffy's sentence and Zoro snarled, watching as his captain's head snapped to the side at the force of the slap and a large red mark appeared on her face. Tara stood in front of Luffy, her arm outstretched and a dark glare on her face. How dare you? Zoro was suddenly on his feet, a snarl on his face and his hand tightly gripping the sheath of his prized sword. His thumb had already popped the blade up so that it would be easier to draw and the swordsman was just waiting for the girl to make another move against Luffy. You bitch. Zoro snapped, grinding his teeth together, and taking a few steps around the table so that he was closer to the two girls. Before he could move another step or fully draw his katana, Sanji was there. The blonde was glaring at the swordsman, a cigarette dangling loosely from his lips and one foot raised in preparation to attack. You dare think to draw your swords on a lady, stupid Marimo? Sanji snarled at the green-haired swordsman. He was downright furious. He already disliked the former bounty hunter for the disrespectful way he treated women, but for the green-haired buffoon to even think of pulling his weapon on a lady, that was unforgivable. Zoro just scoffed and dropped his hand from Watto's sheath. The bitch started it. Sanji aimed a kick straight for Zoro's head that the former pirate hunter blocked with an open palm. Without even missing a beat, Sanji launched another kick and pushed Zoro back slightly until the swordsman was flush against the table. Get out! Sanji snarled angrily. I don't want to see you in here for the rest of the day. At least, I'll be happy if you never come back. Zoro scoffed, not bothering to dignify Sanji's words with an answer but allowed himself to be pushed back towards the door. His eyes found Luffy as he passed and he silently gestured for the raven-haired girl to follow him. Luffy responded to her first mate's silent request with a bright grin and a nod, looking none the worse for wear. Zoro was almost reassured by the girl's happy smile and bright demeanor, but the effect was marred by the still bright red mark on her face. The swordsman's expression darkened and he shot one more glare at Tara before he stepped out and onto the back pier. Luffy followed Zoro's retreating form with her eyes, slightly confused. Her swordsman had gotten so angry at the brunette girl and Luffy could slightly understand why. If someone had attacked Zoro or the rest of her friends, then she would have gotten just as mad, but it was just a tiny slap. It didn't even really hurt. But before that, the she-pirate glanced down at her open hand and clenched it into a fist a few times before tilting her head to the side. Why had she grabbed that girl? What was so wrong with Tara touching Zoro? Luffy's heart thudded against her ribs and she brought her other hand up to rest against her chest. Her heart was pounding and her chest felt tight. It was like that time when Zoro got hurt. Luffy sighed. She still hadn't had the time to talk to Nami about what she had been feeling lately. Sanji had been no help when she mentioned it earlier. The Bharati chef had just swirled around her making comments about her falling for him and how she was a darling innocent angel. Silly. I'm a pirate, not an angel. Luffy eventually just shrugged and turned to follow Zoro outside when a hand settled on her shoulder. Luffy-chan, Sanji began softly. Are you okay? He had seen the confrontation and while he didn't want to take sides, it was his duty to make sure that the lovely angel was okay. She. I'm fine, Sanji. Luffy grinned happily, trying to reassure her future cook, and the blonde chef returned her smile with one of his own. I'm glad. Come on, we need to get back to work. But Zoro. PSH, Sanji scoffed, rolling his eyes. Stupid Marimo. What darling Luffy-chan saw in him he would never know. That bastard can wait a few minutes. Just help me clear off the tables and then you can go see what he wants. Okay, Angel. Outside, Zoro pushed off from where he had been leaning against the wall next to the door with a scowl. That stupid cook. Whatever, he'd wait for Luffy back on the ship. She appeared to be completely fine, but he still wanted to check her over. Inside the restaurant, the sound of shattering glass drew the attention of many of the restaurant's patrons, who gazed at the brunette who had broken the wine glass with expressions of confusion. Hey now, what's the matter? The woman's date asked, watching the girl as she stared out the window with a horrified expression. His own gaze went to the window and his eyes widened as he noticed the ship in the distance that was slowly coming closer. A gasp left him and he quickly sprang to his feet, knocking over the chair he had been sitting in. The noise of his chair hitting the ground drew the attention of others, and one by one, the various customers of the restaurant began to take notice of the ship drawing ever closer. Gasps of horror and shouts of fear filled the restaurant as people sprang to their feet and backed away from the windows closest to the ship, slowly edged closer to the sea restaurant Bharati. The outline of the large vessel started to become clearer. It was a big ship, easily the largest ship in the East Blue and triple the size of the seagoing restaurant Bharati. Its figurehead was that of a saber-toothed tiger and a large black flag flew from the mast. It was a standard Jolly Roger with a large hourglass on either side, a symbol that was recognizable to everyone aboard the restaurant. Some people stepped closer to the windows, as if doubting their own eyes. The flag that turns brave men into chickens. One man muttered, thinking of the tales that had reverberated across the East Blue of this pirate crew's cruelty. That flag is... Another man began, rubbing at his eyes in disbelief. No doubt about it, it's the King of East Blue. It's Don Krieg. On the deck of the ship, Zeph rested his arms against the banister of the second-floor overhang, watching calmly as the ship drew nearer, its shadows slowly blocking out the sun on the deck. It slowly covered Zeph and inched towards Sanji, who had stepped out onto the main deck, both chefs appearing completely unconcerned with its appearance. Meanwhile, inside the restaurant, panic had broken out with all of the patrons beginning to run towards the back doors, crowding against each other and muttering amongst themselves. Even some of the chefs were shaking in fear. Why? What's Krieg doing here? One chef exclaimed, turning to the others around him as if looking for an answer from one of them. Look well, Patty, Carne shouted, pointing out the window even as he shouted at his fellow chef. They're really here. You'll help us drive them away, now won't you? Carne gripped his head between his hands, panicking himself. See, couldn't you be mistaken? He yelled, his voice shaking slightly. He's the leader of a 5,000 pirate ship fleet. Why's he coming all this way to avenge a single man? By the end of his yelling, Patty was practically whining and a few of the other chefs turned to glare back at him. There's no mistake, yeah, he's here now, Carne agreed, poking Patty in the chest. And you'll take responsibility for what you did. The waves caused by the large galleon-class ship caused the Going Merry to shake violently, and the members of the Straw Hat crew rushed to the deck of the ship at the sensation. Nami and Usopp's eyes widened as they took in the sight of the large ship. Ahhhhhhhh. Hey guys. This is our cue. We ought to get outta here ourselves. Usopp shrieked, his whole body shaking as he took in the sight of the Krieg pirates' ship. Look at the size of that ship, it's huge, Nami exclaimed, resting back against the railing on the front deck. Johnny and Yosaku cowered back against the galley doors, but Zoro just watched the ship with a suspicious scowl on his face. Call it swordsman's intuition or just his own familiarity with pirates and their tactics, but something about the appearance of the ship didn't feel right to Zoro. He gripped Watto's sheath and moved his gaze to the restaurant. Luffy's still inside. Sanji continued to stare up at the large ship that was now nearly touching the Baratie and didn't notice that Luffy had joined him until the girl began to talk next to him. Now that's what I call a ship, she cheered, resting her interlocked hands behind her head. Hey, you think that Jin guy's here to pay you back? She turned her head to catch Sanji's gaze and grinned when the blonde cook took a drag of his cigarette. I doubt it, Luffiko-chan. He sighed, managing to give the girl a small smile. But it's strange, he muttered quietly as he turned back towards the ship. In the restaurant, Carne pressed himself up against the window as wind began to blow the fog clear of the galleon-class ship. Hey, he muttered, the other chefs gasping in surprise as the ship was fully revealed. What? Up on the balcony, Zeph's frown deepened as he took in the sight of the ship. The huge galleon ship of the Krieg pirates was totally and completely destroyed. The saber-toothed figurehead was sliced nearly in half and the rest of the ship was littered with holes and large scratches. The sails were tattered and ripped and both masts were tilted at an angle that suggested that they were shattered at the point of connection on the deck. Altogether, the ship looked more like a ghost ship than the terror of the East Blue Seas. Looks like his ships pretty much had it, Luffy muttered, staring at the large galleon with wide eyes. Sanji nodded, his hands buried in his pockets. It doesn't look like it was attacked by a gunboat or anything. But it doesn't look like any human could have done that either. He stated, curious as to why such a large ship was in such disarray. His eyes swept across it as he studied the damaged galleon. It looked as if it had been butchered and sliced to pieces. A tornado maybe? Sanji shrugged before turning to Luffy and smiling at her slightly. We should head inside, Luffiko-chan. It appears we have more guests to take care of. Okay. Luffy eyed the shadows that had appeared on the deck of the ship one last time before allowing Sanji to guide her back into the restaurant with a hand against her lower back. Sanji and Luffy slipped through the back entrance and into the main part of the restaurant, surprised at the quietness and absolute stillness in the large room. All of the customers were holding their breath, flinching at the steady sound of footsteps stomping across the loading dock. Even the chefs looked terrified, watching as a shadow moved past the window as they hid behind the central staircase. Everyone was as pale as ghosts and even Patty looked frightened, the large chef hiding halfway up the spiral staircase and holding onto the metal railing for dear life. The shadow drew closer and closer to the entrance as everyone held their breath in anticipation. The stomping of footsteps stopped and everyone flinched as the door began to creak open, revealing the most feared man of the East Blue, the infamous Don Krieg. Sanji took another drag of his cigarette, watching the door with an intrigued frown on his face. What would this cold-hearted oppressor of thousands look like? The sight that greeted them was not what they had expected. At the door stood a very worn-out and half-dead Don Krieg being supported by Jin. The large pirate captain wore a pair of pale purple pants, a light orange button-up shirt with a black horseshoe pattern and a pair of black boots. A fur-lined, brown coat was draped over the man's shoulders and a white bandage was wrapped around the man's head, holding back his pale violet hair. He almost looked the part of a conquering ruler if not for his worn-out and gaunt appearance. The dark-haired Jin had one of Krieg's arms draped over his shoulder, supporting his captain and keeping the larger man from falling. They stopped just inside the doorway of the restaurant, either unwilling to enter any further or unable. Everyone was silent as they stared at the so-called pirate ruler, surprised to see him in such a pitiable state. Many shared looks among themselves, still too afraid to say anything against the man out loud. Please. Sanji's eyes widened at the soft-spoken request, the words so out of place with the man's regal appearance. Can you give me water? And something to eat? Many of the chefs let out small gasps of shock. flinching back from his words as if afraid that the words themselves could hurt them, but Don Krieg just continued. "If it's money, I've got it. As much as you ask." Even as they watched, Don Krieg began to shake, his whole body trembling from hunger and exhaustion. "I don't know how long it's been since I've last eaten. Please." Next to him, still supporting his frail captain, Jin clenched his teeth and hung his head. He hated seeing his captain in a state like this, begging for something to eat when he was the ruler of the East Blue. "Give me water and something to eat. Please." Sanji stared at the two men, his expression blank. Luffy spared a glance at him, frowning when I for the expression on the blonde chef's face. Her gaze went back to Jin and the man that the others called Don Krieg as the cooks around her began to mutter to each other. "What's wrong with him?" Carne asked, his question voiced to no one in particular. "He doesn't look very dreadful to me," Patty mumbled, still sweating bullets from his position on the central staircase. "Is this guy really the most dreadful pirate, Don Krieg?" Luffy took a few steps closer, tipping the brim of her hat back so that she could get a better look. "I just think he looks hungry." Sanji smiled softly and turned to move past Luffy, squeezing the girl's shoulder as he passed. "Sanji, I wonder what he's doing? See, Captain?" Luffy spun her head back to the front at Jin's cry. Don Krieg had attempted to take a step forward, but it was too much for the already exhausted pirate. He stumbled forward, and because of his large bulk Jin was unable to steady him. Both of them were sent toppling to the ground, and while Jin was able to push himself to his knees, Krieg was far too weak to do anything more than lie there, close to unconscious. Don Krieg, Jin forced himself into a kneeling position so he could look his captain over and gritted his teeth with worry before turning to stare at the cooks in the restaurant with wide eyes. Please," he begged, nearly shouting. "Please help my captain, he's starving to death." The customers around the restaurant just stared at the kneeling man, many of them wearing looks of disgust while others still looked slightly afraid of the weakened pirate. "He hasn't eaten for days. If he doesn't get food soon, he'll die." Still, no one said a word and no one moved to help the kneeling man. Jin gulped, shock etched into his face as he stared out at the unsympathetic crowd of people. Why? Why would no one help them? They had money, so why? On the central staircase, Patty began to laugh. "This is great," he yelled, coming out from behind his cover in a show of bravery. "So this is the notorious bully, Don Krieg?" Jin flinched at the venom in Patty's tone. "We've got money this time," he shouted, remembering the last time he had come here. "Aren't we customers here?" "Not in your life," Patty chuckled, placing his closed fists on his hips. He turned his head to grin at Carne, who stood next to him. "Hey, hurry up and call the Marines." "What?" Jin perked up slightly at the word Marine. He couldn't believe that they were talking about turning him and Don Krieg over to the Marines so nonchalantly. "He has weakened. They won't get another chance like this." Around the restaurant everyone began to voice their agreement to Patty's idea, revealing that all of them thought that it was better to turn Krieg over rather than feed him. "No food for him. Get him out of here." "That's right," one customer's voice rose above the others. "If he gets better, there's no telling what he'll do next." "He's done so many awful things," another person chimed in. "He deserves to be caught, even if he's starving. He's never done anything good in his life." A cook leaning back against the central staircase crossed his arms over his chest and scoffed. "He might even attack this boat if he gets better. We shouldn't even hand him a glass of water." Everyone began to shout their agreement, voices overlapping until it was just a chorus of noise. Jin just let his eyes sweep the crowd of people, panic and horror written all over his face. He was saddened by their responses and by everyone's words. The thought that he wouldn't be able to get any help for his captain. No one would show them an ounce of sympathy and give them even an ounce of food. He bowed his head and fought back the urge to cry. "I won't do anything." Next to him, Don Krieg began to force himself up, struggling until he was on his hands and knees. As soon as he was steady, he bent his head forward and touched his forehead to the ground in a classic show of humility. "I promise, I'll leave after I eat," Don Krieg begged, beginning to cough as he struggled to stay kneeling. "So please, help me." "Don Krieg, please stop," Jin said, placing one hand on Krieg's back to steady his captain. "Please don't beg. How can you do such a humble act? Please stop it." Tears were beginning to form in Jin's eyes even as Don Krieg continued to talk. "I promise. Please. Anything. even your leftovers, anything." The other people in the restaurant were in shock that the proud and feared Don Krieg was begging for scraps, and their faces all showed varying levels of surprise. "Don." Jin's voice was shaky. He hated seeing his captain so weak, and to be so powerless in front of people that hated them was even worse. Luffy had moved to rest against the railing at the bottom of the central staircase and was watching the two kneeling men with a blank but interested look. Her face showed no sign of what she was thinking as she continued to watch the scene unfolding in front of her. She heard someone's footsteps behind her and turned her head to see Sanji approaching from the direction of the kitchen. A small smile appeared on the raven-haired girl's face as she took in the sight of a bowl filled to the brim with fried rice in one hand and a bottle of wine in the other. It looked like no one but her had noticed the blonde chef leave and come back. The she-pirate watched curiously as he passed her, a small smirk on her face. Still, this was why Luffy wanted Sanji for her chef. He was a genuinely good person, even though he could be a bit odd. She giggled slightly, remembering some of Sanji's silly antics as she watched him continue towards the kneeling Krieg. Patty had made his way down the stairs as his confidence had grown, and he was now standing in front of Jin and Don Krieg. "Hey, you think I'm sympathetic?" he scoffed, looking down at the two men disdainfully. "Out of the way, Patty." Before Patty could register what Sanji had said, the Baraati's second-in-command had slammed his foot into the other chef's face. His kick sent Patty flying back, and the man collided with the central pillar, cracking the stone wall and creating a large crater. Luffy's eyes widened at the sight, and she watched as Patty slumped forward onto the ground unconscious. She was a little surprised by Sanji's actions, but she couldn't say that she hadn't expected them. Over the past few days she had noticed that Sanji and Patty didn't quite get along with each other. Luffy smiled as she watched Sanji approach Jin and Don Krieg. He knelt down in front of the two pirates and set the bowl of rice on the ground next to Krieg's head. "Take it, Jin," he ordered, handing the dark-haired man the bottle of wine and a spoon for the rice. "Let him have it." "Sanji." Jin couldn't believe his eyes. This was the man who had, just a few days ago, saved his life, and now he would do the same for Jin's captain, Don Krieg. He really owed this man more than he could ever repay. "Thanks." Krieg didn't waste a single second, digging into the food using his bare hands and shoving fistful after fistful into his mouth. Sanji rose to his feet as he watched Krieg eat, his lips twitching with a soft smile. His eyes slid over to Jin, but the other pirate quickly turned away, unable to look his savior in the eye. It was almost as if he was ashamed of something, but Sanji had no idea what it could possibly be. Crane suddenly darted down the stairs from his earlier position and ran up to Sanji, pointing his finger accusingly at the blonde chef. "Hey, Sanji. Take away the food. Don't you know what kind of person he is?" Sanji didn't even bother to turn and look at Karne as the man continued to yell, more interested in watching the silent interaction between Jin and Don Krieg. "He's the king of the East Blue, the sneakiest pirate of them all." Karne cringed as he thought back on all the stories he had heard of Krieg's deeds in the past. It all began in prison. The guy pretended to be one of the Marine. He killed the captain of his ship and took over that ship to become a pirate. Sometimes he'd raise a Marine Florida, then he'd attack the city and other docked ships. Or he'd pretend to surrender, and then make surprise attacks. He'll do anything to win. That's how he got to where he is now. Sweat was rolling down Karne's face as he talked, goosebumps appearing on his uncovered arms. "What?" Luffy's face looked unimpressed and she scoffed slightly. "So he's a snake, eh? He shouldn't be underestimated." Even now, Karne continued, even as Sanji continued to ignore him. "Eat and leave. How can we believe what he says? We'd be doing the world a favor if we gave this wretch up." The empty bottle of wine was slammed down onto the ground and Karne flinched back, still very afraid of Krieg despite his weakened state. Sanji glanced down at Don Krieg in surprise at the loud noise, watching as the man began to force himself to his feet. Suddenly, Krieg swept his arm out and, using his momentum, clotheslined the blonde chef. The force of his strike knocked the cigarette out of Sanji's mouth and sent him crashing to the ground. Luffy gasped, her eyes wide at the sight of Sanji knocked back by the very person he had helped. The she-pirate wasn't the only one surprised either. Sanji!" Karne screamed, his eyes and everyone else's as wide as saucers. A female customer screamed, pulling everyone out of their shocked daze and causing the rest of the customers to flee towards the back of the restaurant. Jin remained kneeling in the same position, staring at Sanji with gritted teeth. It wasn't supposed to be this way. Jin never wanted any harm to come to the person who saved his life, and yet. Krieg promised me. He swore that all he would do was eat, feed our crew, and leave. I'm a fool. Jin's guilt doubled as he watched Sanji cough and struggled to pull air into his winded lungs, shame etched across his face. This is not what we agreed on, Don Krieg. You promised that you wouldn't harm this place or these people, so I took you here. Besides, Jin shouted. That man saved our lives. Krieg reached forward and latched onto Jin's shoulder, dragging the man up into a standing position before lifting him even higher so that the first mate's feet didn't even brush the ground. Jin flinched at the pain shooting through his arm and lifted his other hand to brace against his elbow in an effort to ease some of the discomfort. Yeah, it was good. I feel re-energized. Krieg tightened his hold, causing the dark-haired man to cry out in pain, his free hand shooting to Krieg's arm. Krieg continued to squeeze until he heard the crack of bone and felt Jin's arm give under his grip before he tossed the panting man to the ground. Not even sparing a glance at the whimpering man on the ground, he turned his gaze to the other people still left in the restaurant and smirked, looking more like a demon ready to pounce than a man. The customers of the restaurant burst through the back doors, swarms of people screaming and running in a blind panic, as if fleeing from some unmentionable evil. Zoro, Nami, and Usopp watched, confused, as people scrambled onto one of the boats docked near the Going Merry, setting sail as soon as the ship was full. Usopp's hands clenched against the railing, his expression worried. What's going on in the restaurant? He asked nervously. Let's go check it out, Zoro replied, his expression blank. What? Usopp shrieked, staring at Zoro with wide eyes, not quite sure he had heard the swordsman correctly. You serious? What's wrong? You scared? Zoro mocked, sending Usopp a teasing smirk. Huh, don't be silly, of course. I'm not afraid. Usopp puffed out his chest and forced a smile on his face, but both Zoro and Nami could see his legs shaking. Zoro's smirk widened slightly, but he just gave the long-nosed Tina, HMPH, in reply before turning away. His smirk vanished as he stared at the derelict galleon with calculating eyes. Strange. I can't see anybody on that ship. For some reason, Zoro had a feeling that something was wrong with that ship and that things were only going to get worse. Lu. You better be okay, Captain. Luffy's eyes were wide as she watched Don Krieg survey the restaurant, her expression still blank. Don Krieg, on the other hand, looked like a madman. A terrible vibe was emanating from the pirate captain, and he glared at the people around him with an expression that gave new meaning to the words, "If looks could kill." Luffy frowned slightly. This man was more dangerous than he appeared, and she didn't like the way his energy felt. He felt less like a person and more like an inhumane monster. Everywhere Krieg looked, chefs flinched back and the pale violet-haired man smirked. Isn't this a nice restaurant? He said calmly. I'll take it. Carne let out a shocked gasp, as did many of the other chefs, at Krieg's declaration. Sanji forced himself up onto one elbow, having finally regained consciousness. A bit of blood trailed from his mouth and he tried to glare, his whole body shaking. So, that's why you came. Next to Sanji, Patty had also regained consciousness and was holding his head. When the thug-like chef's vision had cleared, Don Krieg was standing right in front of him. Patty began to tremble, his mouth open and eyes wide with shock as he stared up at the most feared pirate in the East Blue. My ship's ruined, Krieg finally said, letting out a huff of breath. I want a new one. Leave after you've gotten your things. His words brokered no argument and he stared at them as if daring anyone to argue with him. What? Carne shouted, clenching his hands into fists at his side. Don Krieg. Jin muttered, his voice cracking as he held one hand bracingly against his cracked shoulder. That's not what you promised. Don Krieg just turned away from his vice commander and Jin cursed softly. He had been foolish to think that his captain would follow through with his promise. All of this was his fault, and now Sanji and the others would have to leave their home if they wanted to live. Still appearing completely calm, Don Krieg jerked a thumb back over his shoulder to point at where his ruined ship was docked. There are about 100 men still alive on that ship. All of them starving and injured. First, prepare food and water for 100 men. Some of them have already. starved to death. When no one moved to follow Krieg's orders, he barked, "Right away." Carne scoffed, raising one shaking fist at Krieg. "What? You expect us to feed our executioners? Do you actually think we'll do what you say? We won't aid them. We refuse." With Carne's words, other chefs began to voice their agreements, refusing to aid the very people that would turn around and attack them. "Refuse?" Krieg scoffed, almost rolling his eyes at the words being shouted at him. "Don't misunderstand. I'm not ordering food. I'm giving you an order. Nobody, ever, disobeys me." Krieg's scream was loud and rumbled through the restaurant like thunder, causing many of the chefs to flinch away from him and cower behind tables and chairs like scared children. Krieg huffed out another long breath, waiting for the cook's next response. "Sanji." The blonde chef turned his gaze away from Krieg and softened his glare as he recognized the voice calling out to him. "Sanji, I'm sorry," Jin said, panting softly from the pain in his shoulder. "I didn't mean for this to happen." "Bastard," Patty shouted, glaring over at Sanji with clenched fists. "Look what you've done. If you had just let him starve, none of this would have happened." The chef's angry words caused Jin to flinch back, the injured pirate squeezing his eyes closed as he felt the pricking sensation of tears building up. He knew exactly what Patty was talking about, and the thug-ish chef was completely right. If Sanji had just left him to die, then he never would have been able to go back to Don Krieg and tell him of this place. The whole restaurant would have been spared the pirate's wrath and Sanji wouldn't have been injured. Sanji just ignored Patty's shouts, not even bothering to spare the incensed man a look. Instead, his gaze was focused completely on the injured Jin. He risks when he saved Jin. He knew there was a possibility that he would return with Don Krieg, knew that he was putting the restaurant in danger. But, he had become a chef so that he could help those in need, feed the hungry, and make sure that the people around him would never starve. Without saying a word, Sanji pushed himself to his feet. He straightened the wrinkles in his suit and shoved his hands in his pockets before turning and making his way towards the central staircase that led to the kitchens. "Hey, Sanji!" Patty shouted, watching the blonde man curiously, still a little annoyed that his fellow chef was ignoring him. "Where are ye off to?" Sanji stopped in front of the stairs and turned his head slightly, not looking at Patty, but more trying to catch Don Krieg out of the corner of his eye. "The kitchen." Smirking slightly, he used his thumb to brush off the trickle of blood that had trailed down from his mouth. "I've gotta prepare food for 100 men. Patty and Carne flinched back in shock at the assistant head chef's words. "Sanji." Jin breathed, not quite able to believe what he had heard. Even Luffy was slightly shocked, her eyes wide and her lips twitching into a small smile. "Sanji." "What?" Every chef in the restaurant began shouting at once, some of them pointing angrily at the blonde chef, with others just flailing back in shock. Don Krieg just smirked, glad that his orders were being followed but not really all that surprised. No one would dare defy him. "Yes. That's how it should be." Sanji glared back at him, not happy with being ordered around. Just because he was going to make the food and save his crew's lives didn't mean he wanted to assist the man. Before Sanji could take another step towards the kitchen, he was surrounded by most of the chefs of the Bharati, Patty and Carne among them. Every chef was holding some sort of weapon and the rest were holding frying pans and large cooking utensils, all of them aimed at the blonde chef. "You're being Krieg's little puppet, Sanji," one of the chefs shouted, tightening his hold on his weapon. "I'll never let you get into the kitchen," another vowed. "I've had enough of your nonsense." Sanji just continued to stand there, his hands still calmly resting in his pockets as he surveyed his co-workers. He could see the shocked and disbelieving expressions on many of their faces and the outright hostile one on Patty's. Sanji couldn't really blame them for acting this way, but he didn't want to fight his family. With a sigh, Sanji removed his hands from his pockets and spread his arms wide. "Do it," he said calmly, the chefs around him starting slightly in surprise. "If you want to stop me, do so." Sanji lifted his head, allowing one of the sharpened spear weapons to brush against his neck. "I'm aware," he began quietly. Luffy watched Sanji silently, looking neither upset nor confused with the blonde chef's declaration. She had known when she first saw Sanji giving Jin food the kind of person that her future chef was. "I know that he's a hopeless bully, a terrible and cruel man. But that's none of my business. I don't care. I don't care what happens after they've had their meal. Not a care in the world. I'm a chef. Nothing more." When people are hungry, I offer them food. That's all there is to it. Sanji let his eyes slide open, having closed them sometime during his speech. For a chef, isn't that enough? Before anyone could reply or Sanji could continue talking, a large fist slammed into the back of the blonde chef's head and he dropped to the ground with a thud, revealing Patty standing behind him with a furious expression. "Patty!" Carne yelled, shocked that the man had knocked Sanji out. Patty just stood straight and grinned over at Carne before jerking his hand back over his shoulder. "Hey, take him outta here." "Sanji!" Patty looked back down as the man tried to push himself into a sitting position. "You've often given food to the customers that I drove away, haven't you? I don't care who's right or wrong, but I can't allow this to happen." Patty turned and stormed past a glaring Sanji, shooting the assistant head chef a glare of his own. "I can't let you do as you please anymore. I'll protect this restaurant. Luckily, there's only one enemy. What can a lone Don Krieg do to all of us?" Patty knelt down under the curve of the spiral staircase where a secret door was hidden and began rummaging through it. "Pirates come to this floating restaurant every day. I'm always prepared for anything." "That's..." Sanji breathed, pushing himself up so he could stare at his coworker curiously. "Did you enjoy your meal, Krieg?" Patty asked mockingly, a sinister grin on his face. "How about it? Since you've finished your meal. How about some medal for dessert?" Patty rose to his feet and spun to face Krieg, a large lobster-shaped bazooka held in his hands. He flicked the switch on top of the bazooka to turn it on, sparking the bazooka's ignition before aiming it at Don Krieg. "Syrup meatball." Patty pulled the trigger, the blazing cannonball shooting out and heading straight for Krieg. Krieg's eyes were wide as he watched the cannonball approach him, and as it slammed into his body the entire entrance to the Bharati was engulfed in smoke and light. The blast forced everyone still in the restaurant to shield their eyes until the light had faded. "Don!" Jin shouted, still shielding his eyes but trying to see his captain through the smoke. Patty rested the bazooka against his shoulder as he stared at the mass of smoke. "I think I broke the door," he muttered, unconcerned. "The boss will be mad at me for that." He shrugged. "It's okay. We're protecting this place. It's no major damage," Carne said, attempting to reassure his friend. "What are we gonna do about those people on Krieg's ship?" Sanji asked, having forced himself into a sitting position during the aftermath of the explosion. "I dunno. Why don't we just put some butter on their ship and cook it up?" Suddenly, a familiar voice rang out through the smoke. "That sounds delicious. Stupid cook." As the smoke began to clear more, Krieg's form was revealed. The man appeared to have absolutely no scratches on him and was glaring at Patty with a look of complete and utter loathing. "Giving me such an awful dessert. This restaurant's despicable." Krieg threw off his coat, revealing gold-plated steel armor underneath and causing many of the chefs to gasp in shock. Luffy whistled slightly. The armor must have been what protected him from the bazooka's cannonball. Suddenly the man's fur-lined shoulder pads lifted up, revealing 2 guns under each one. The fur-lined side panels against his abs opened up, revealing 3 more guns on either side, and Krieg also had 2 flintlock pistols in his hands. Despicable. Sanji's eyes widened in shock and Patty and Carne flinched back at the weapons pointed at them and the rest of the chefs. "Now die." He fired every single one of his weapons, the bullets slamming into the chefs and knocking all of them down. "That armor." Luffy breathed, leaning forward, one arm outstretched. "It can shoot?" Sanji finished the end of Luffy's unspoken sentence, looking horrified. Jin had covered his face with his hands, unwilling to watch Krieg shoot down the rest of the chefs. Patty, Carne, and Sanji appeared mostly unharmed by the firing squad attack, but the rest of the chefs were not faring quite as well. The lay collapsed on the ground and against tables and walls, bleeding from multiple gunshot wounds. Smirking, Krieg allowed the hidden guns in his armor to close up again before he moved to pull off his brown gloves, revealing gold armor-plated gauntlets with diamonds embedded in the knuckles and the back of the hand. "Do as I say," he shouted angrily. "I'm the strongest man there is." "These arms are stronger than anybody's." Don Krieg lifted one arm, as if showing off the bicep muscles hidden under the armor. "My super alloy armor is tougher than anything." His other hand curled into a fist and he slammed it lightly against his breastplate as I've got a diamond punch, which can destroy everything. An army of 5,000 men. I've never lost a battle in my life. I'm the perfect person to claim the title of Don. Luffy silently watched Krieg rant, angry that the man had hurt the chefs of the Bharati but also curious as to what would happen next. From behind her, a hand latched onto her shoulder and pushed her gently to the side. "Out of the way, lass," head chef Zeph ordered, stepping up next to the raven-haired girl with a large sack tossed over one shoulder. "I ordered you to get the food ready," Don Krieg continued to shout, not noticing Zeph's arrival. "Now hurry up and do it, nobody disobeys me." Suddenly, the large sack that Zeph had been holding was tossed at Don Krieg's feet, causing the pale purple-haired man to focus his gaze on the old chef and the waitress standing next to him. "Here's food for 100 men. Help him get it on the ship," Zeph ordered, appearing completely calm as he stared down the pirate who was shooting up his restaurant. Owner Zeph. Many of the chefs that were still conscious stared at their boss in shock, not really believing that he would give up the food to Don Krieg without a fight. "What are you doing, old man?" Luffy asked calmly, resting one hand against the top of her straw hat. "Isn't this a little risky?" Sanji was watching his mentor with a surprised expression as well, his lip twitching slightly. He knew that Zeph was giving them food for the same reason he had wanted to, because they were hungry. If it was just to protect his restaurant, the old geezer would have fought, but for hungry people, he was just a chef. Meanwhile, Don Krieg was watching the middle-aged man in front of him with wide eyes. He had had what the other chefs called him and he couldn't quite believe it. "Zeph is it?" he asked, needing to be sure. "Zeph is in. Redfoot Zeph?"